The smell of burnt cinnamon rolls filled the air as my father's voice cut through the morning rush. "Pack your things, Cassidy. You're done here." I stood behind the counter of Brooks Family Bakery, flour still dusting my apron, watching 20 years of my life crumble faster than day-old pastry. The customers went silent, their coffee cups frozen halfway to their lips. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But I didn't cry, didn't beg. I just looked at him and said, "Are you sure about that?" He had no idea that 3 months earlier I'd found something in Grandma Rose's old recipe box that would change everything. He thought he was throwing out his disappointing daughter. What he was actually doing was handing me the keys to an empire he never legally owned. The morning started like every other Wednesday in Cedar Falls, Oregon. I arrived at the bakery at 4:30, same as I had for the past 6 years since graduating from culinary school. The familiar weight of the heavy wooden door, the scent of yeast and vanilla that clung to everything, the way the old floorboards creaked under my feet as I made my way to the kitchen. This place was my sanctuary, my second skin, my future. Or so I thought. I'd been running the day-to-day operations since I was 22, transforming what had been a struggling neighborhood bakery into Cedar Falls' most popular breakfast destination. The artisanal sourdough program was my idea. The weekend brunch menu that had people lining up around the block, mine too. The partnerships with local coffee roasters and organic farms, the Instagram account that had grown to 15,000 followers, the catering contracts that now brought in 40% of our revenue, all mine. Dad always took the credit, of course. Victor Brooks, the charming front-of-house personality who remembered every customer's name and their usual order. He was good at that part, the schmoozing and the storytelling about 4 generations of Brooks Baker. What he wasn't good at was the actual work of keeping a business alive in the 21st century. That Wednesday morning, I was testing a new recipe for lavender honey scones, when I heard voices from the front of the shop. It was barely 5:15, and we didn't open until I wiped my hands on my apron and pushed through the swinging doors that separated the kitchen from the main cafe. Dad stood near the register with Natalie, my stepmother, and a man I didn't recognize. He was younger than Dad, maybe early 40s, wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in our cozy flour-dusted world. His hair was slicked back and he carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes from never having worked a day in food service. "Cassidy," Dad said when he saw me, his tone strangely formal, "this is Derek Manning from Manning Development Group. He's made us an offer." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "An offer?" Derek stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Miss Brooks, your father has been telling me about the challenges of running a family business in today's market. My company specializes in revitalizing commercial properties in growing downtown areas like Cedar Falls. We'd love to help your family transition to a more profitable venture." The words hit me like ice water. Transition? Natalie smoothed her perfectly styled blonde hair and gave me what she probably thought was a sympathetic look. "Honey, the bakery industry is so competitive now. Derek's company wants to turn this space into a modern gastropub. They're offering 3 times what this place is worth as a bakery." I looked at Dad, waiting for him to laugh, to tell Derek that our family business wasn't for sale, that 4 generations of Brooks had poured their hearts into this place. Instead, he avoided my eyes and said, "It's a good opportunity, Cass. Maybe it's time to be realistic about the future." "Realistic?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "Dad, we're booked solid for catering through the end of the year. Our profit margins are the highest they've ever been. What part of that isn't realistic?" Derek's smile never wavered. "Miss Brooks, I understand your attachment to this place, but sentiment doesn't pay the bill. Your father mentioned you've been struggling with some of the newer health regulations. The cost of equipment upgrades." "We're not struggling," I interrupted. "I've handled every compliance issue, every equipment upgrade. I know this business inside and out." "That's exactly the problem," Natalie said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "You think you know everything, but you're still just an employee here. Your father owns this business, and he's decided it's time to make a smart financial decision." The word employee hit me like a slap. I'd worked 7-day weeks for years, had poured my creativity, my energy, my entire adult life into making this place successful. I'd deferred my own dreams, turned down job offers from restaurants in Portland and Seattle, all because I believed this bakery was my future. "Dad," I said quietly, "can we talk privately?" He finally looked at me and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not just distance, but something that looked almost like resentment. "There's nothing to discuss, Cassidy. My mind's made up." The next hour passed in a blur of paperwork and handshakes. Derek left with promises to have contracts drawn up within the week. Natalie disappeared upstairs to their apartment above the bakery, humming to herself like she'd just won the lottery. And I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by half-finished scones and the life I'd thought was mine, trying to understand how everything had changed so quickly. The day's customers began arriving at 6. Same as always, Mrs. Patterson ordered her usual whole wheat toast and black coffee. The Johnson twins grabbed their chocolate croissants before school. Tom from the hardware store picked up the dozen assorted donuts for his staff meeting. I served them all with the same smile I always wore, but inside I felt like I was watching someone else's life. Dad worked the front counter like nothing had happened, chatting with customers about the weather and the high school football team's chances this season. But I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before. The way he let me handle all the difficult customers while he took credit for the compliments. How he'd step away whenever suppliers called with problems, leaving me to negotiate prices and delivery schedule. The way he'd arrive at 8:30 every morning, after I'd already been working for 4 hours, and act like we were equal partners in the day's success. Around 10, during the brief lull between breakfast rush and lunch prep, I found myself standing in the storage room where we kept Grandma Rose's old things. She'd passed away 5 years ago, leaving the bakery to Dad, but we'd never cleared out her personal items from the back office. Boxes of recipe cards, old photographs, business documents from decades past, all gathering dust while the real business happened in the front of the house. I'd always meant to go through everything properly, to organize Grandma's recipes and maybe frame some of the old photos for the wall. She'd been the heart of this place, the one who'd taught me to braid chola and fold croissants, who'd shared stories about the early days when she and Grandpa built the business from nothing. That morning, feeling lost and looking for some connection to the person who'd believed in me most, I opened one of the boxes I'd never explored before. It was filled with legal documents, most of them yellowed with age. Incorporation papers from 1952. Insurance policies from the 70s. Tax records that probably should have been shredded decades ago. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in a faded kitchen towel, was a metal recipe box I'd never seen before. It was smaller than the ones we used for daily operations, painted mint green with roses along the edge. Inside, along with handwritten cards for things like Victory Garden carrot cake and Rationing Day molasses cookies, was a sealed envelope with my name on it. My hands trembled as I opened it. Grandma's handwriting, shaky but determined, covered 2 pages of cream-colored stationery. "My dearest Cassidy," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you found what I hid away for safekeeping. I always knew you were the real baker in the family, the one with the vision and the heart to carry on what your great-great-grandmother started. Your father is a good man, but he's never understood that this business is about more than money." I sat down hard on an overturned crate, my heart pounding as I read on. "I've watched you these past few years, seen how you've breathed new life into this old place. You've earned the right to call it yours, not just in spirit but in law. What your father doesn't know is that I changed the ownership structure 6 months before I died. The bakery, the building, the land, it's all held in trust for you, to be transferred on your 25th birthday or if certain conditions are met." I had to read that sentence 3 times before it sank in. I was 26 now, had been for 8 months. I knew there might come a day when someone would try to take this place away from you, when money would matter more than legacy. That's why I worked with Grace Winters. You remember her, my old friend who became a lawyer to make sure you'd be protected. There's a copy of all the legal documents in my safety deposit box at Cedar Falls Community Bank. Grace has the key and the authority to help you claim what's rightfully yours. The letter went on to explain that Grandma had used a complex trust structure to protect the business from creditors, divorce settlements, and what she called family members who might not understand the true value of what we've built. Dad had been listed as the operating manager, but the actual ownership had been held in trust, waiting for me to either turn 25 or meet certain business performance benchmarks. According to the letter, I'd met those benchmarks 2 years ago. I sat in that dusty storage room for 20 minutes, reading and rereading Grandma's words, trying to process what this meant. The bakery wasn't Dad's to sell, it was mine, had been mine for over a year, legally speaking, though nobody knew it. The timing felt surreal. Just hours after Dad had announced his plan to sell my life's work to a developer, I discovered that he didn't have the legal right to make that decision. It was like Grandma had reached out from beyond the grave to protect everything we'd built together. I carefully folded the letter and tucked it into my apron pocket, then spent the rest of the afternoon in a strange state of suspended animation. I filled online orders, prepped tomorrow's bread dough, trained the new part-time girl on the espresso machine, all while my mind raced with possibilities and questions. Grace Winters. I remembered her vaguely from Grandma's funeral, a tall, elegant woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, who'd given me a long hug and told me Grandma had been proud of the woman I was becoming. I'd assumed she was just being polite, the way people are at funerals. Now I wondered what else she'd known that day. When Dad left at 3 to run errands, the way he did every afternoon, I called information and got Grace's office number. Her receptionist told me she was in court but could see me the next morning if it was urgent. "It's about Rose Brooks's estate," I said. "I'm her granddaughter." There was a pause, then the receptionist's voice warmed considerably. "Oh, Miss Brooks, Mrs. Winters has been waiting for your call. She'll see you at 9 tomorrow morning." That evening, I stayed late to do inventory, something I did every Wednesday without fail. It was meditative work, counting bags of flour and cases of eggs, checking expiration dates, and noting what needed to be ordered. The familiar routine helped calm my racing thoughts. Dad and Natalie were upstairs having dinner when I finally locked up at 8:30. I could hear the TV and the clink of dishes, the sounds of their normal evening routine. They had no idea that the foundation of their plans had just shifted beneath their feet. I drove home to my small apartment on Maple Street, the same house where Grandma had lived for 60 years before moving into the assisted living facility. I'd bought it from the estate after she died.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Using every penny of my savings plus a loan from the bank. Dad had thought I was crazy to take on that much debt for just a house, but it had felt important to keep that piece of family history in the family. Now I wondered if Grandma had orchestrated that too. The house had come with all her furniture, her books, her lifetime collection of ceramic mixing bowls and vintage kitchen gadgets. I'd assumed the family had just wanted to avoid the hassle of an estate sale, but maybe there had been a deeper purpose. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at Grandma's old kitchen table, the same one where she'd taught me to roll pie crust when I was 12. The letter was still in my apron pocket, but I'd memorized every word. Tomorrow I'd learn exactly what legal protections she'd put in place. Tonight I just needed to sit with the knowledge that she'd seen this day coming and had loved me enough to prepare for it. The phone rang just after 10. Dad's name appeared on the caller ID. "Cass, I wanted to talk to you about this morning. I know it was a shock." I took a deep breath. Look, I know you love the bakery. We all do, but sometimes you have to be practical about these things. Derek's offer is really generous, and it would set us all up for the future. Us all, as if I'd been included in the decision-making process. As if my future had been considered at all. "What exactly are you planning to do with the money?" I asked. "Well, Natalie and I have been talking about maybe getting a place in Arizona. The winters here are getting harder on my back, and the cost of living is so much lower. We could buy a nice house, maybe invest in something less demanding than food service." "And what about me?" There was a pause. "You're young, Cass. You've got your whole life ahead of you. This could be your chance to try something new. Maybe go back to school, travel a little." Derek said his company sometimes hires local culinary talent for their restaurant concepts. "You could probably get a job with them if you wanted to stay in the food business." A job, with the company that was buying my life's work. Working for someone else in the space where I'd built my career, my reputation, my dreams. "Dad, what if I told you I didn't want to sell?" Another pause, longer this time. "Honey, it's not really up to you. I know that sounds harsh, but this is a business decision. I'm the owner, and I have to do what's best for the family's financial future." The owner, if only he knew. "I understand," I said quietly. "I'll see you tomorrow." After I hung up, I sat in Grandma's kitchen until midnight, thinking about the past 6 years and the future I'd thought was secure. Dad wasn't wrong about one thing. This was about what was best for the family's future. He just had no idea which family member actually got to make that decision. The next morning, I arrived at the bakery at my usual time, but everything felt different. I unlocked the door, turned on the lights, started the ovens, began the daily routine of bringing the space to life. But now I moved through it with a new awareness, seeing it not just as the place where I worked, but as the place I owned. The building itself was solid, built in 1952 when Grandma and Grandpa first opened their doors. The original brick walls, the hardwood floors that had been refinished twice in 70 years, the large windows that filled the space with morning light. All of it was mine. The industrial ovens I'd convinced Dad to upgrade 3 years ago. The espresso machine that had tripled our beverage sales. The custom display cases where we showcased the pastries that had become our signature. Mine. More than that, though, was the intangible value I'd create. The relationships with suppliers who gave us priority on the best ingredients. The customer base that trusted us for their celebrations and daily comfort. The reputation that brought food bloggers from Portland to write about our innovative takes on classic recipes. The brand I'd built on social media, the systems I'd developed for efficiency and quality control, the culture of excellence I'd fostered among our small staff. All of it was the result of my vision and my work. At 8:45, I left the morning prep in the capable hands of Maria, our head baker, and drove to Grace Winter's law office. The building was historic red brick, converted from a 1920s department store, and her office was on the third floor with a view of the river that ran through downtown Cedar Falls. Grace looked exactly as I remembered from the funeral, though perhaps a bit more fragile. She stood when I entered, came around her desk and embraced me warmly. "Cassidy, dear, I've wondered when this day would come. Please, sit down. Would you like some coffee?" "I found Grandma's letter," I said without preamble, settling into the leather chair across from her desk. Grace smiled, the kind of smile that suggested she'd been waiting years for this conversation. "I figured you might eventually. Rose always said you were the observant one, that you'd find what you needed to find when the time was right." She moved to a large filing cabinet, withdrew a thick folder and set it on the desk between us. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, Cassidy. Most people think of estate planning as something you do to avoid taxes or make sure your assets go to the right people after you die. Rose thought of it as a way to protect the people she loved while she was still alive to see the results." Grace opened the folder and pulled out a document that looked official and intimidating, full of legal language and notary stamps. "The Brooks Family Bakery Trust was established in March of 2018, 6 months before your grandmother's death. The business, the building and the land are all held by the trust, with you as the sole beneficiary." I stared at the papers, trying to make sense of the dense legal text. "But Dad's been running everything. He signs the checks, makes the business decisions. He's been serving as the trustee and operating manager, which is different from being the owner. The trust allowed him to continue running the day-to-day operations, but any major decisions, like selling the property, require the beneficiary's consent. That's you." Grace turned to another page and pointed to a section highlighted in yellow. "When you turned 25 last year, you became eligible to assume full control of the trust assets. We could have transferred everything to you then, but Rose wanted you to make that decision when you were ready, not just when you reached an arbitrary age. And now it seems, circumstances have made the decision urgent." Grace leaned back in her chair and studied me with those sharp eyes I remembered. "Your grandmother predicted this might happen. She loved your father, but she knew he didn't have the same connection to the business that you did. She worried that he might eventually see the bakery as just an asset to be monetized, rather than a legacy to be preserved." I thought about Dad's conversation with Derek Manning, how easily he'd dismissed my concerns, how ready he'd been to cash out without even consulting me. "So what happens now? That depends on what you want to happen. If you choose to assume control of the trust, we can transfer all the assets to your name. The bakery becomes yours, legally and practically. Your father would need to find a new role in the business, assuming you wanted him to stay involved at all." The magnitude of it hit me all at once. Not just the ownership of the bakery, but the power to determine its future. The responsibility for the employees who depended on the business for their livelihoods. The customers who'd made us part of their daily routines. The legacy that 4 generations of my family had built. "There's something else," Grace continued, pulling out another document. "Rose also established a separate fund to help with the transition. She knew that taking over a business would come with challenges, especially if there was family conflict involved. There's enough money set aside to cover operating expenses for 6 months, plus funds for any legal fees that might arise. She'd thought of everything. Even from the grave, Grandma was still taking care of me, still making sure I had what I needed to succeed." "Grace, if I do this, if I claim ownership, what happens to Dad? I mean, legally speaking, he becomes an employee, if you choose to keep him on, or he can pursue other opportunities. The choice would be entirely yours." Grace's expression softened. "I know this puts you in a difficult position, dear. Family businesses can be complicated even under the best circumstances." I spent another hour in Grace's office, going through the legal documents, understanding my rights and options, learning about the process of transferring the trust assets to my name. By the time I left, I had a clear picture of my situation and a decision to make. I could claim what was rightfully mine, and face the inevitable family conflict that would follow. Or I could let Dad sell the business to Derek Manning and watch 4 generations of family legacy disappear into a gastropub concept designed by someone who'd never held a piping bag or worried about whether the bread would rise properly on a humid day. When I got back to the bakery, the lunch rush was in full swing. Dad was working the register, charming customers with his easy smile and folksy stories. Natalie was there too, wiping down tables and talking to regulars about the exciting changes coming to the bakery. Neither of them looked up when I entered. I spent the afternoon working in the kitchen, losing myself in the familiar rhythms of kneading and rolling, measuring and mixing. The physical work helped quiet my racing thoughts, gave me space to process what I'd learned and what it meant for my future. Around 4, Derek Manning returned with a leather portfolio and a smile that was all business. Dad called me out front to be part of the conversation, as if my presence was a courtesy rather than a necessity. "Miss Brooks," Derek said, extending his hand. "I've had my team run some preliminary numbers on the property, and I think you'll be pleased with what we're prepared to offer." He opened his portfolio and pulled out a glossy presentation folder. Inside were architectural renderings of what the space would look like as a gastropub, complete with exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, and a bar where our display cases currently stood. The images were sleek and modern, designed to appeal to the young professionals who were moving to Cedar Falls as Portland's suburbs expanded southward. "As you can see, we're planning to honor the historic character of the building while updating it for contemporary dining preferences. The gastropub concept is very popular with the demographic that's driving growth in this area." I flipped through the renderings, each one erasing a little more of the bakery's identity. The corner where Grandma used to sit and chat with customers, replaced by high-top tables for quick dining. The display case where I'd arranged pastries like pieces of art, gone in favor of a beer tap system. The kitchen where 4 generations of my family had perfected recipes, redesigned as an open-concept space focused on burgers and craft cocktails. "What's the timeline?" Dad asked, his excitement barely contained. "We'd like to close within 60 days with renovation beginning immediately after. We're hoping to open by the holidays to capture the winter dining season." 60 days. 2 months to say goodbye to everything I'd built, everything I'd planned for, everything I'd thought was my future. "And the financial terms?" Natalie chimed in. Derek smiled and pulled out another document. "We're prepared to offer $2.4 million for the building and land, plus an additional $100,000 for fixtures and goodwill, all cash, no financing contingencies." Dad's eyes widened. Even Natalie looked stunned. It was more money than our family had ever imagined having access to. "There is one small detail we need to clarify," Derek continued, his tone still friendly but somehow more focused. "Our title research shows that the property ownership is a bit complicated. There's a trust involved and we'll need to make sure all the proper parties sign off on the sale." I felt my heart rate spike but kept my expression neutral. "What kind of complications?" "Nothing major, just some paperwork from your grandmother's estate that needs to be sorted out. Our lawyers are confident it won't be an issue, but we want to make sure everything is clean before we proceed." Dad frowned. "What are you talking about? The bakery's been mine since Mom died." Derek's smile flickered for just a moment. "I'm sure it will all work out fine. We just need to dot all the I's and cross all the T's, you understand." After Derek left with promises to have contracts ready by the end of the week, Dad seemed energized in a way I hadn't seen in years. He spent the rest of the afternoon making phone calls, telling friends and family about the sale, researching real estate prices in Arizona. Natalie pulled up photos of golf communities and retirement villages on her phone, already planning their new life. Neither of them asked how I felt about any of it. That evening, after we'd closed and cleaned up, Dad finally seemed to remember that I might have opinions about the future of my career. "Cass, I know this is all happening fast, but I really think this could be good for you too. Derek mentioned they might be interested in hiring you as a consultant for their menu development. You could work with some of their other locations, maybe travel a little, see how other markets approach the bakery concept." I looked at him standing behind the counter where I'd spent countless hours, where I'd built relationships with customers and perfected recipes and dreamed about the day when this would all be officially mine. He was talking about my future like it was a consolation prize, something to soften the blow of losing everything I'd worked for. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course. When you look at this place, what do you see?" He glanced around, taking in the familiar surroundings with what seemed like genuine affection. "I see the place where I grew up, where I learned about hard work and customer service. I see the business my parents built, and that I've tried to maintain." "Maintain?" "Well, I've kept it profitable, kept the customers happy. It's not easy, you know, running a business in today's economy." I nodded slowly. "And what do you think I see when I look at this place?" Dad seemed to consider the question seriously for the first time. I guess you probably see it as your job, the place where you've learned your trade." "My job." After 6 years of creating systems, building relationships, developing products, managing staff, increasing revenue, establishing our reputation, he saw my contributions as just doing my job. "Dad, do you know what our profit margins were when I graduated culinary school?" He shrugged. "We were getting by, 3%. We were barely covering expenses, and that was with you and Mom working 7 days a week. Do you know what they are now? I haven't looked at the numbers lately. 22%. Our revenue has increased by 400% in 6 years. We went from barely surviving to being the most successful bakery in 3 counties. And you think I just maintained what you built? Dad's expression shifted, confusion replacing the easy confidence he'd worn all day. Cass, I appreciate everything you've done, but let's not get carried away. Success like that doesn't happen because of one person. You're right, I said quietly. It happens because of vision, innovation, hard work, and understanding what customers really want. Tell me, Dad, which of those things did you contribute? The question hung in the air between us, heavier than I'd intended. Dad's face flushed, and I could see him struggling between defensiveness and some uncomfortable recognition of the truth. I've been working in this business since before you were born, he said finally. I know a thing or two about running a bakery. I'm sure you do, but knowing how to run a business and actually running it successfully are different things. When was the last time you developed a new product? When did you last negotiate with suppliers, or handle a customer complaint, or stay up all night because the walk-in cooler broke and we had 3 catering orders due the next morning? Dad opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. We both knew the answers to those questions. The point is, I continued, this business isn't just your inheritance anymore. It's become something bigger, something I helped create. And maybe before you sell it to someone who's going to turn it into just another generic restaurant, you should consider what that means. I left him standing there and drove home through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls, past the coffee shop where I'd spent countless evenings working on menu development, past the farmers market where I'd built relationships with local produce, past the community center where we donated pastries for fundraisers and school events. This wasn't just my workplace, it was my community, my identity, my contribution to the place I'd chosen to call home. That night, I called Grace Winters at her home number, the one she'd written on the back of her business card. Grace, it's Cassidy. I've made my decision. I rather thought you might have. What would you like to do? I want to claim ownership of the trust. All of it. Tomorrow, if possible. There was a pause, then Grace's voice, warm with what sounded like pride. Your grandmother would be so pleased, dear. I'll have the paperwork ready first thing in the morning. Grace, there's something else. My father is planning to sell the bakery to a development company. They want to close in 60 days. Well, Grace said, and I could hear the smile in her voice, I suppose we'd better make sure they understand who they're actually negotiating with. The next morning arrived, with a kind of crisp October air that made Cedar Falls feel like a postcard. I drove to Grace's office at 8:30, an hour before the bakery would normally demand my attention. The streets were quiet, just a few joggers and dog walkers enjoying the peaceful start to their day. They had no idea that by noon, the landscape of downtown Cedar Falls would shift in ways that would ripple through the community for years to come. Grace's receptionist, a woman named Helen, who looked like she'd been organizing legal documents since the Eisenhower administration, greeted me with a knowing smile. Mrs. Winters is expecting you, dear. She's been in since 7 preparing your paperwork. I found Grace in her office, surrounded by neat stacks of documents, each pile flagged with colorful tabs and sticky notes. She looked up when I entered, and I saw something in her expression that reminded me powerfully of Grandma Rose, that combination of fierce protectiveness and quiet determination that had always made me feel safe as a child. Cassidy, good morning. I hope you slept well, because today is going to change your life in some fairly significant ways. She gestured to the chair across from her desk, the same one where I'd sat yesterday in shocked disbelief. Today, I settled into it with purpose. I've been thinking about this all night, about what Grandma would want, about what's right for the business, about what I owe to the people who depend on the bakery for their livelihoods. I'm ready to do whatever needs to be done. Grace nodded approvingly. Before we proceed, I want to make sure you understand the full scope of what you're about to inherit. It's not just the bakery building and the business assets. Your grandmother was quite strategic about how she structured this trust. She pulled out a folder I hadn't seen the day before, thick with property deeds and financial statements. The bakery sits on a corner lot that's become quite valuable as Cedar Falls has grown. But what most people don't realize is that Rose also owned the small parking lot next door, the one that serves the bakery and the antique shop. That's an additional 1/4 acre of prime downtown real estate. I blinked in surprise. I'd always assumed the parking lot was city property or belonged to the antique shop owner. There's more. Rose was quite savvy about diversifying her investments while keeping them tied to the community. She owns a small apartment building 3 blocks from here, 6 units that generate steady rental income, and she held a partnership stake in the farmers market pavilion that was built 5 years ago. Grace opened a financial statement that made my head spin. The numbers were much larger than I'd ever imagined. All told, you're looking at assets worth approximately $4.5 million, plus ongoing income streams that have been flowing into the trust for years. $4.5 million. I'd spent my entire adult life worried about making rent and paying off student loans, carefully budgeting every personal expense so I could pour my energy into the bakery without taking a larger salary. Meanwhile, I'd been the beneficiary of a trust worth more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. Why didn't she tell me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Because she wanted you to build your own relationship with the business first. She was afraid that if you knew about the money too early, it might change your motivation. She wanted to be sure you loved the work itself, not just the security it represented. Grace was right, of course. If I'd known at 22 that I was set to inherit millions, would I have worked those brutal 16-hour days perfecting sourdough techniques? Would I have spent my weekends researching new suppliers and attending food service trade shows? Would I have cared so much about every customer interaction, every online review, every small improvement that might make the bakery a little bit better? She also wanted to protect you from family members who might see you differently if they knew about the money. Grace continued. Rose was very aware that wealth can complicate relationships, even within families. She thought it was better for you to establish yourself as an independent adult before taking on the responsibility of managing these assets. We spent the next 2 hours going through every document, every property deed, every financial account. Grace explained the legal process of transferring the trust assets to my name, the tax implications, the ongoing responsibilities I'd be taking. By the time we finished, my signature was on dozens of pages, and I was legally the owner of Brooks Family Bakery and everything that came with it. There's one more thing, Grace said as she gathered the signed documents into a neat stack. Rose left specific instructions about how to handle the transition if there was family conflict. She knew your father well, loved him dearly, but she also understood his limitations. She wanted to make sure you had options if he didn't accept the new arrangement gracefully. She handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandma's familiar handwriting. She asked me to give you this after the legal transfer was complete. Consider it her final piece of advice. I tucked the envelope into my purse, not ready to open it in Grace's office. Some conversations with Grandma needed to happen in private. So what happens now? I asked. Now you go to the bakery and inform your father that there's been a change in ownership. I'd recommend being straightforward but gentle. This is going to be a shock for him, and shock can make people react in unpredictable ways. I drove back to the bakery with my hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel, not from fear, exactly, but from the magnitude of what had just happened. In the space of 2 hours, I'd gone from being an employee worried about losing her job to being the owner of a multi-million-dollar business empire. The responsibility felt enormous, but also strangely familiar, as if I'd been preparing for this moment without realizing it for years. The lunch rush was just winding down when I walked through the front door. Dad was behind the register, counting out change for Mrs. Chen from the hardware store. Maria was restocking the display case with the afternoon pastry selection. Everything looked normal, routine, exactly as it had every day for the past 6 years. But I was different now. I moved through the space with a new awareness of ownership, noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. The way the afternoon light hit the wooden floors that I now knew belonged to me, the hum of the refrigeration units that were now my responsibility to maintain, the easy chatter between staff and customers in a space that was now mine to protect and nurture. Cass, there you are, Dad called out when he saw me. Derek Manning called this morning. He wants to schedule another meeting tomorrow to go over the contract details. I told him we'd be available around 2. I nodded non-committally and made my way to the kitchen, where I could hear the familiar sounds of afternoon prep work. Our small staff was busy with their usual routines. Tommy rolling out pie crusts for tomorrow's quiches, Sarah mixing the dough for Friday's special bread orders, Maria checking the proofing schedule for the weekend's catering jobs. These people had become more than employees over the years. They were part of the bakery's extended family, each contributing their own skills and personalities to the daily rhythm of the business. Tommy had started as a teenager washing dishes and had worked his way up to being our most reliable prep cook. Sarah was a single mom who'd needed flexible hours, and we'd built her schedule around her kids' school and daycare needs. Maria had been with us for 4 years, ever since she'd moved to Cedar Falls from Mexico, and her expertise with traditional Mexican pastries, had become one of our most popular weekend features. All of them depended on the bakery for their livelihood. All of them had probably heard rumors about the potential sale and were worried about their futures. As the new owner, their job security was now my responsibility. "Hey everyone," I said, raising my voice to get their attention. "Can we gather in the front for a few minutes? I need to talk to you all about something important." Dad looked up from the register with a puzzled expression. "What's this about, Cass?" "Just come out front, Dad. This affects everyone." We assembled in the main dining area, Dad, Natalie, and our 4 staff members, all wearing expressions that ranged from curious to concerned. I'd never called an all-hands meeting before, and the unusual nature of it had everyone on edge. I took a deep breath and looked at each of their faces, these people who'd been part of my daily life for so long. I know there have been rumors about changes coming to the bakery, and I wanted to address those directly rather than let speculation continue. Dad nodded approvingly, probably thinking I was about to announce the sale and help him manage the staff's concerns. This morning I met with Grace Winters, the estate attorney who handled Grandma Rose's affair. It turns out there were some legal details about the bakery's ownership that we weren't fully aware of. I could see Dad's expression starting to shift from approval to confusion. When Grandma died, she didn't actually leave the bakery to Dad in the way we all thought she had. Instead, she set up a trust structure that was designed to protect the business and ensure its long-term survival. As of this morning, that trust has been transferred to me. I am now the legal owner of Brooks Family Bakery. The silence that followed was profound. Dad's face went through a series of changes: confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked like anger. "That's impossible," he said finally. "This bakery has been in my name for 5 years. I've been paying taxes on it, making business decisions, handling all the legal responsibilities. You've been serving as the trustee and operating manager," I said gently, "which is different from being the owner. Grandma's attorney has all the documentation if you'd like to review." Natalie stepped forward, her voice sharp with suspicion. "This sounds like some kind of legal trick. You can't just show up one day and announce that you own a business that doesn't belong to you." "I'm not announcing that I'm taking something that doesn't belong to me," I replied calmly. "I'm announcing that I'm claiming something that has belonged to me all along, but was held in trust until the right time." Dad was shaking his head, his face flushed with what looked like embarrassment and anger. "Even if what you're saying is true, this is a hell of a way to handle it. Cassidy, calling a meeting, making some kind of public announcement. I wanted everyone to hear it directly from me, rather than through rumors or speculation. The staff deserves to know that their jobs are secure, that the bakery isn't going anywhere, and that we're going to continue building on what we've all created together." Tommy, who'd been quiet through the whole exchange, finally spoke up. "So does this mean we're not selling to that development guy?" "That's exactly what it means," I said, meeting his eyes directly. "This bakery isn't for sale, not to Derek Manning, not to anyone else. We're staying right here, and we're going to keep doing what we do best." The relief on the staff's faces was immediate and obvious. Sarah actually started crying and Maria reached over to squeeze her hand. They'd been worried about their futures, and I'd just given them the security they needed. Dad, however, looked like he'd been slapped. "Cassidy, we need to talk about this privately. This affects more than just you." "You're right," I agreed. "It affects all of us. But the decision has already been made. This business stays in the family, and it stays in Cedar Falls." Natalie's voice was ice cold when she spoke. "And what about the people who've been working their whole lives to build something here? What about the sacrifices your father has made to keep this place running? Dad's contributions to the bakery are enormous, and I hope he'll continue to be part of our success going forward. But contributing to a business and owning a business are different things, and it's important that everyone understands the distinction." I could see Dad struggling with the situation, caught between anger at being blindsided and confusion about how this had happened without his knowledge. "Cass, even if the legal paperwork says what you think it says, you have to understand that this puts me in an impossible position. How am I supposed to work for my own daughter? The same way I've been working for you for the past 6 years," I said quietly. "By focusing on what's best for the business and the people who depend on it." The meeting broke up shortly after that, with the staff returning to their work with obvious relief and Dad and Natalie retreating upstairs to their apartment to digest what had happened. I spent the rest of the afternoon in the kitchen, working alongside Tommy and Sarah and Maria, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy while my mind raced with all the implications of what I'd done. Around 4 o'clock, Derek Manning arrived for his unscheduled meeting with Dad. I watched through the kitchen door as Dad explained that there had been some complications with the ownership paperwork, that they'd need to postpone any contract discussions until the legal issues were resolved. Derek's practiced smile never wavered, but I could see the calculation in his eyes as he processed this unexpected development. Of course, Mr. Brooks, these old family businesses can have complex ownership structures. I'm sure our attorneys can help sort everything out. After Derek left, Dad came into the kitchen where I was working on tomorrow's bread orders. His anger seemed to have cooled into something more like resignation. Cass, I need to understand what just happened here. Are you telling me that my mother left me out of her will entirely? She didn't leave you out, Dad. She made you the trustee, which meant you were responsible for managing the business until I was ready to take over. You've been doing exactly what she wanted you to do. But she didn't trust me to own it. The pain in his voice was real, and I felt a stab of sympathy for him. I think she trusted you to take care of it until I was ready. She knew you'd keep it running, keep the traditions alive, make sure I had something to inherit when the time came. Dad was quiet for a long moment, absently wiping down the stainless steel counter that was already spotless. So what happens now? Do you want me to pack up and leave? I want you to stay if you're willing to work with me as a partner instead of treating me like an employee. I want us to build something together that honors what Grandma started and takes it into the future. And what about Derek's offer? $2.5 million, Cass. That's more money than either of us will ever see again. Dad, the bakery and the other properties Grandma left are worth more than Derek's offer, and they generate ongoing income instead of just a one-time payout. From a purely financial standpoint, keeping the business makes more sense than selling it. He looked surprised. Other property. I realized he had no idea about the full scope of what Grandma had built. She owned more than just the bakery, Dad. She was a lot more business savvy than any of us realized. That evening, after we'd closed and cleaned up, I drove home to Grandma's house on Maple Street and finally opened the sealed envelope Grace had given me. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Grandma's careful handwriting. My dearest Cassidy, it began. If you're reading this, it means you've chosen to claim what's yours instead of letting someone else decide your future. I'm proud of you for having the courage to stand up for yourself and for what we've built together. Your father is a good man, but he's never understood that a business is more than just a way to make money. To him, the bakery has always been a burden he inherited, something he had to manage rather than something he chose to create. You're different. You see the possibilities, the connections to community, the way food can bring people together and make their lives a little bit better. The next few weeks are going to be difficult. Your father will feel betrayed, and he may try to make you feel guilty for taking what's rightfully yours. Natalie will probably encourage him to fight the legal arrangements, maybe even to contest the trust in court. Don't let their reactions make you doubt your decision. Remember that you didn't steal anything from anyone. You earned your place in this business through years of hard work, innovation, and dedication. The legal structure I created was designed to protect what you built, not to take anything away from your father. If he chooses to stay and work with you, treat him with respect and let him contribute in ways that play to his strengths. He's good with customers, good at the storytelling part of running a family business, but don't let him make you feel like you owe him ownership just because he's your father. If he chooses to leave, let him go with dignity and help him find a new path that makes him happy. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the freedom to discover who they are when they're not trying to live up to someone else's expectation. Most importantly, remember that this business is now your responsibility, not just your inheritance. The employees who depend on you, the customers who trust you, the community that supports you, they're all counting on you to make decisions that serve something bigger than your own interest. I've given you the tools you need to succeed. Now it's up to you to use them wisely. All my love, Grandma Rose. P.S. There's one more thing I never told you. The original recipe for our cinnamon rolls, the one that made our reputation in the early days, is written on the back of my marriage certificate, tucked away in the safety deposit box. Some secrets are too valuable to trust to recipe cards. I sat in Grandma's kitchen until well past midnight, reading and rereading her final letter, feeling the weight of her expectations and her confidence in my ability. She'd known this day would come, had planned for it with the same careful attention she'd given to perfecting a croissant recipe or balancing the books at the end of each month. The next morning, I arrived at the bakery to find Dad already there, something that hadn't happened in years. He was sitting at one of the small tables in the front, drinking coffee and staring out the window at the quiet street. I've been thinking all night, he said when he saw me, about what Mom might have been thinking when she set up this trust arrangement. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down across from him. And what did you come up with? I think she was trying to protect the business from me, he said quietly. Not because she didn't love me, but because she knew I didn't love it the way you do. I've been going through the motions for 5 years, Cass. Showing up, handling the basics, but not really building anything new. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years, maybe ever. She probably figured that if I officially owned the place, I'd eventually get tired of the work and sell it to whoever offered the most money. And she'd be right. Dad, no, let me finish. I've been angry about this, feeling like she didn't trust me or value what I contribute. But the truth is, I've been looking for an exit strategy almost since the day she died. The business felt like a burden I inherited, not something I chose. He took a long sip of his coffee and looked around the bakery with what seemed like genuine affection for the first time in years. But watching you work, seeing what you've built here, I realized that Mom wasn't punishing me. She was protecting something that matters, and she was making sure it ended up in the right hands. So what do you want to do? I asked. I want to help you make this place everything it can be. Not as the owner, not as the boss, but as someone who believes in what you're doing. If you'll have me, of course I'll have you, Dad. This is still a family business. Good, because I have some ideas about how we can expand the catering side of things, and I think you're going to like that. We spent the morning working together in a way we hadn't in years, planning and strategizing instead of just reacting to daily demands. Dad's ideas about catering expansion were actually quite good. He'd been paying attention to customer requests and market trends more than I'd realized. Around 10, Derek Manning called to schedule a follow-up meeting about the sale. Dad handled the call with a professionalism that impressed me. Mr. Manning, I appreciate your interest in the property, but I need to inform you that the bakery is no longer for sale. The ownership situation has been clarified, and the new owner has decided to keep the business in the family. I could hear Derek's voice through the phone, rising in pitch and volume as he realized his deal was falling apart. I understand your disappointment, Dad continued, but this is a firm decision. The Brooks family bakery will remain a bakery. After he hung up, Dad looked at me with a wry smile. I have to admit, that felt pretty good. I never liked that guy's slicked back hair anyway. The rest of the day passed with a sense of normalcy that had been missing for weeks. Customers came and went, orders were filled, the familiar routines continued, but underneath the surface, everything had changed. The staff worked with a new sense of security, knowing their jobs were. Dad engaged with the business in a way I hadn't seen since before Grandma died, and I moved through the space with the confidence that comes from knowing you have the authority to protect what you've built. That afternoon, while Dad handled the front counter, I called a meeting with our suppliers to let them know about the ownership change, and to reassure them that our ordering patterns and payment schedules would remain consistent. I also reached out to the local business association to update our membership information, and to volunteer for the Downtown Revitalization Committee I'd been wanting to join for years, but had never felt I had the authority to represent the bakery. Each phone call, each small administrative task, reinforced the reality of what had happened. I wasn't just working at Brooks Family Bakery anymore, I was building its future. Around closing time, Natalie came downstairs from their apartment, dressed for going out and carrying a small suitcase. I'm going to stay with my sister in Portland for a few days, she announced to Dad, not looking at me. I need some time to think about whether this is the kind of situation I want to be part of. Dad nodded, looking tired but not surprised. Take all the time you need now. This has been a lot to process. After she left, Dad and I finished the closing routine together, something we'd done thousands of times but that felt different now. Cass, he said as we were turning off the lights, I owe you an apology for not seeing what you were contributing all these years, for not understanding that you weren't just helping me run Mom's business, you were building your own. You don't need to apologize, Dad. You've been doing what you thought was right, maybe, but I should have been paying closer attention. I should have realized that the person doing the work of building something deserves to own what they've built. We locked up together and stood for a moment on the sidewalk outside, looking at the bakery sign that had been part of the Cedar Falls landscape for 70 years. What do you think Grandma would say if she could see us now? I asked. Dad smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in days. I think she'd say it's about time we started acting like partners instead of boss and employee. I think you're right. As I drove home that night, I passed Derek Manning's rental car parked outside the Riverside Inn. Through the window I could see him on his phone, probably reporting back to his development company that their easy acquisition had just become considerably more complicated. I felt a moment of sympathy for him. He'd come to Cedar Falls expecting to close a simple real estate deal and instead had run into a family business, protected by a grandmother's foresight and a granddaughter's determination to honor the legacy she'd inherited. But mostly I felt grateful for Grandma Rose's wisdom and planning, grateful for Dad's willingness to adapt to the new reality, grateful for the community that had supported the bakery through generations of change. and grateful for the opportunity to prove that sometimes the best business decision isn't the most profitable one, it's the one that honors what matters most. The weekend after I claimed ownership brought an unexpected wave of community support that caught me completely off guard. Word had spread quickly through Cedar Falls' tight-knit network of business owners and longtime residents about the bakery's change in ownership. What surprised me wasn't that people knew small towns have their own communication systems that work faster than any social media platform, but how enthusiastically they responded. Saturday morning arrived with a line of customers stretching halfway down the block, longer than any weekend rush we'd experienced before. Regular customers brought friends and family members they'd never introduced to the bakery. People I recognized from around town but had never served came in to try our pastries for the first time. The cash register rang constantly from opening until mid-afternoon, and by 2 o'clock we'd sold out of nearly everything in our display cases. Miss Henderson, who owned the antique shop next door, stopped by during a brief lull to congratulate me personally. "Cassidy dear, I'm so glad you're keeping this place going. When I heard that developer was sniffing around, I was worried we'd lose the heart of our little downtown district." Similar sentiments echoed throughout the day. The pharmacist from across the street mentioned how relieved he was that the corner wouldn't become another chain restaurant that could be anywhere. The librarian brought her book club members in for their monthly meeting, something they'd never done before, saying they wanted to support a business that understood the value of staying local. Even more surprising was the response from other business owners. Jake Morrison, who ran the coffee roasting company that supplied our beans, called to offer a better pricing structure now that I was the official owner. "I've been wanting to work more closely with you for years," he admitted. "Your father was always pleasant enough, but you're the one who understands what makes a great product. Let's talk about some exclusive blends that could set you apart from every other bakery in the region." The weekend's success felt like validation not just of my ownership, but of the vision I'd been nurturing for years. These weren't just customers buying pastries, they were community members investing in something they saw as important to preserve. The weight of that responsibility was both thrilling and sobering. Sunday evening, as I was reconciling the weekend's record-breaking sales figures, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, the voice was familiar. "Miss Brooks, this is Derek Manning. I hope you don't mind me calling your personal number. I got it from your father before the situation became complicated." I felt my shoulders tense automatically. "What can I do for you, Mr. Manning?" I was hoping we could have a conversation, just the two of us. "I think there may have been some misunderstandings about our development plans, and I'd like the opportunity to present some alternatives that might work better for everyone involved." "I appreciate the call, but there aren't any misunderstandings. The bakery isn't for sale. I understand that's your position right now, but I think you might be interested in some of the other options we can offer. What if I told you we could incorporate a bakery component into our gastropub concept? You could maintain your brand while benefiting from our marketing resources and customer base expansion." The offer was smoother than I'd expected, designed to make me feel like I could have both preservation and progress. But I'd learned enough about development companies to recognize a strategic retreat when I heard one. "Mr. Manning, I'm not interested in being a tenant in my own building, and I'm not interested in turning my family's bakery into a component of someone else's concept. The answer is no. Miss Brooks, I respect your attachment to this business, but I hope you'll consider the broader economic picture. Cedar Falls is changing, and businesses that don't adapt to new market realities often find themselves struggling to compete." The subtle threat wasn't lost on me. "Are you suggesting that my business is going to struggle?" "I'm simply observing that the restaurant industry is highly competitive, and independent operators face significant challenges that larger, well-funded concepts can handle more easily. Thank you for your concern about my business prospects. I'm confident we'll manage just fine." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone, recognizing that Derek's call wasn't really about making a deal, it was about gathering intelligence. He wanted to understand who he was dealing with now that his simple acquisition had become complicated. The fact that he'd called me directly rather than going through Dad suggested he understood where the real decision-making power lay. Monday morning brought a different kind of challenge. I arrived at the bakery to find Natalie's car parked outside, which surprised me since she'd said she was staying with her sister indefinitely. When I unlocked the front door, I found her sitting at one of the corner tables with a woman I didn't recognize. Middle-aged, professionally dressed, carrying a leather briefcase that screamed attorney. "Good morning, Cassidy," Natalie said with a smile that didn't reach her eye. "I'd like you to meet Patricia Hendricks. She specializes in estate law and family business disputes." I felt my stomach drop, but kept my expression neutral. "Good morning. Is there something I can help you with? Patricia Hendricks stood and extended her hand with the kind of firm handshake that was meant to establish dominance from the first moment of contact. Miss Brooks, I've been retained to review the estate documents related to this business. There are some questions about the validity of the trust structure that was established by your grandmother. Questions from whom? From family members who believe they may have legitimate claims that weren't properly addressed in the original estate planning. I looked at Natalie, understanding dawning. You're challenging Grandma's will. I'm ensuring that everyone's interests are properly protected. Natalie replied, your father devoted 20 years of his life to building this business after your grandmother became too ill to manage it herself. It's only fair that his contributions be recognized in the ownership structure. Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. We're prepared to file a petition with the probate court requesting a full review of the estate's administration. Specifically, we believe there may have been undue influence in the creation of the trust, and that the original will should be probated according to standard intestacy law. I'd never been in a situation like this before, but some instinct told me not to respond immediately or show any sign of panic. I'll need to discuss this with my attorney before I can comment on any legal challenges. Of course, we're not trying to ambush anyone here. This is simply about ensuring that the estate was handled properly, and that all family members receive their fair share of what should be a family asset. After they left, I immediately called Grace Winters, who listened to my description of the morning's encounter with the kind of calm professionalism that made me understand why Grandma had trusted her with such important responsibilities. I'm not surprised this is happening, Grace. Contested estates are more common than people realize, especially when significant assets are involved. The good news is that your grandmother anticipated this possibility and built substantial protections into the trust structure. What kind of protections? First, the trust was established well before she became ill, and we have extensive documentation of her mental competency at the time. Second, she used multiple attorneys and financial advisors to create the structure, so there's no question of undue influence from any single party. Third, she included specific language addressing potential challenges from family members who might feel entitled to different arrangements. Grace paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. Most importantly, she created what's called a no-contest clause. If anyone challenges the trust and loses, they forfeit any benefits they might have received under the original arrangement. What benefit? Your father was set to receive a significant cash settlement from the trust on your 30th birthday, essentially a retirement package that would have allowed him to step away from the business with financial security. If Natalie pursues this challenge and loses, that settlement disappears entirely. I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that Grandma had protected my inheritance so thoroughly. Sadness that family relationships had deteriorated to the point where legal warfare was becoming inevitable. Grace, what do I need to do? Nothing dramatic. Continue running your business, document everything carefully, and let me handle the legal response. I've been preparing for this possibility for 5 years. The next few weeks settled into a strange routine. During the day, the bakery operated normally. Customers came and went. Orders were filled. The rhythm of daily business continued unchanged. Dad and I worked together with increasing comfort, finding a partnership dynamic that felt more natural than the old boss-employee relationship had ever been. But underneath the surface, legal maneuvering was creating tension that affected everything. Natalie had moved back into the apartment above the bakery, but she barely spoke to me and treated every interaction like a business transaction rather than a family relationship. Dad seemed caught in the middle, trying to maintain peace with his wife while also building a working relationship with me. The community support that had surprised me during the first weekend continued, and even intensified as word spread about the legal challenge. Customers began asking pointed questions about whether the bakery was really going to stay in the family, and many made it clear that they were counting on me to preserve what they saw as an important local institution. Patterson, who'd been coming in for her whole wheat toast and black coffee every morning for 15 years, pulled me aside one Tuesday to share her perspective. Honey, I don't know what's going on with your family situation, but I want you to know that this place matters to a lot of people. My Harold proposed to me at that corner table in 19. Our kids had their birthday parties here. When Harold was in the hospital last year, you personally delivered soup to our house every day for 2 weeks without being asked. She patted my hand with the kind of maternal affection that reminded me powerfully of Grandma Rose. What I'm saying is, this business is woven into the fabric of this community in ways that go beyond just buying and selling food. Don't let anyone make you feel like that doesn't matter. Similar conversations happened throughout those weeks. The florist across the street mentioned that she'd been referring customers to us for wedding cake tastings for years because she trusted our quality and reliability. The mayor stopped by to ask if I'd be interested in catering the annual Founders' Day celebration, something the bakery had never been invited to do before. Even the pastor from the Methodist Church asked if I'd consider providing communion bread, a contract that would be small in revenue but significant in community standing. Each interaction reinforced my understanding that owning the bakery meant more than just running a profitable business. I was becoming a steward of something that mattered to people in ways I was still discovering. The legal pressure continued to build as well. Patricia Hendricks filed her petition with the probate court, and Grace responded with a motion to dismiss based on the trust's no contest clause. Local newspapers picked up the story, treating it as a human interest piece about family businesses and generational change, rather than the legal battle it was becoming. The attention brought unexpected consequence. A food blogger from Portland drove down to try our pastries and ended up writing a feature article about authentic family bakeries fighting to survive in an age of corporate consolidation. The piece was picked up by several regional publications and brought customers from as far away as Eugene and Salem. More significantly, the publicity attracted the attention of other family business owners who'd faced similar challenges. I started receiving calls and emails from people who'd successfully navigated estate disputes, family transitions, and legal challenges to their ownership. Their advice was invaluable, but their stories also made me realize how common these situations were and how often they destroyed both businesses and family relationships. One particularly helpful conversation came from Elena Rodriguez, who owned a successful chain of Mexican restaurants in California. She'd inherited her family's business under similar circumstances, and had faced a legal challenge from relatives who felt entitled to ownership share. The thing you have to remember, Elena told me during a long phone conversation, is that this isn't really about the money, or even about the business. It's about power and control and people's ideas about what they deserve, versus what they've earned. How did you handle the family relationships after everything was settled? Some of them repaired over time, once people realized that my success was good for everyone. Others never did. You have to be prepared for the possibility that legal victory might come at the cost of family harmony. Elena's words stayed with me as I watched Dad navigate the increasingly difficult situation with Natalie. He clearly loved his wife, but he also seemed to be recognizing that her approach to the estate dispute was putting him in an impossible position. Several times I caught him looking frustrated or sad after phone conversations with her attorney, and I could see the stress wearing on him. One evening in late November, after we'd closed the bakery and finished the day's cleaning, Dad lingered instead of heading upstairs to his apartment. "Cass, can we talk about something?" "Of course." He sat down heavily at one of the front tables, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "This legal situation is getting out of hand. Natalie's attorney is talking about depositions and document discovery, and all sorts of things that are going to be expensive and time-consuming and probably won't change anything in the end. What do you think we should do?" "I think I should tell her to drop the whole thing. Your grandmother knew what she was doing when she set up that trust, and I should have respected her decision from the beginning instead of getting caught up in dreams about cashing out and retiring to Arizona." The admission surprised me. "Dad, if that's what you really want, to retire, to move somewhere warm, we can figure out a way to make that happen. This business is successful enough now to support different kinds of arrangements. That's not what I want anymore. I want to be part of what you're building here. I want to contribute something meaningful instead of just coasting toward retirement." He looked around the bakery with the kind of attention I hadn't seen from him in years. "I've been watching you these past few weeks, seeing how the community responds to you, how the staff looks to you for leadership. You're not just running a business, you're nurturing something that matters to people." "We're nurturing it, Dad. This is still a family business." "I appreciate that, but we both know who the real leader is here, and I'm okay with that. More than okay, actually. I'm proud of it." Dad's conversation with Natalie that night was loud enough that I could hear it through the ceiling of my apartment 3 blocks away, not the specific words, but the emotional intensity that carried across the quiet neighborhood. The next morning, Natalie's car was gone from its usual parking spot and she didn't return for several days. When she did come back, it was with a resignation that felt different from her earlier strategic retreat. She asked to speak with me privately, something that hadn't happened since the legal challenge began. "I want you to know that I've asked Patricia to withdraw the petition," she said without preamble. "This whole thing has gotten more complicated and expensive than I expected, and it's putting stress on my marriage that isn't worth it." I felt a wave of relief, but also caution. "What changed your mind?" Patricia's review of the trust documents showed that your grandmother really did cover all the bases,
there aren't any obvious weaknesses to exploit. The no contest clause means that if we lose, Victor forfeits the settlement he was supposed to receive, which would leave us worse off than we are now.
She paused and looked around the bakery with what might have been grudging respect. And honestly, watching you run this place for the past month has made me realize that you're not just some kid who got lucky with an inheritance. You've built something here that's worth preserving. Thank you for saying that. Don't thank me too much. I still think you could have handled the initial announcement more diplomatically. But I can see that you're serious about making this work, and you're good at it. Natalie's withdrawal of the legal challenge felt like a significant victory, but it also marked the beginning of a new phase in the family dynamics. She and Dad decided to move to a smaller apartment across town rather than living above the bakery, creating physical distance that seemed to help everyone adjust to the new relationship structures. Dad continued working at the bakery, but with a different role that played more to his strengths. He took over most of the customer-facing responsibilities, managing the front counter, handling catering consultations, representing the business at community events. I focused on the operational side, menu development, staff management, financial planning, supplier relationships. The division of labor felt natural and sustainable in a way our previous arrangement never had. Dad seemed energized by having clear responsibilities that didn't require him to make decisions he wasn't equipped for, and I felt liberated to pursue the strategic planning and creative development that I'd always been passionate about. December brought the holiday season, traditionally our busiest time of year. Orders for Christmas cookies, holiday pies, and special occasion cakes started arriving in early November and continued building until we were working 12-hour days to keep up with demand. This year felt different though. Instead of just trying to survive the rush, we were able to plan and execute with a level of sophistication that came from having clear leadership and stable family relationships. I hired 2 additional part-time staff members to help with the increased volume, invested in some new equipment that improved our efficiency, and even introduced a few new products that became immediate bestsellers. The financial results were remarkable. December's revenue was 40% higher than the previous year, and our profit margins actually improved despite the increased labor costs. More importantly, we handled the volume without the stress and chaos that had characterized previous holiday seasons. On December 23rd, as we were finishing the last batch of Christmas Eve orders, Dad looked at the daily sales report and shook his head in amazement. "Cass, I have to admit something. I never thought this business could be as successful as it's become under your leadership. I was so focused on just getting by, just maintaining what Mom had built, that I never imagined we could actually grow and thrive. It's not just my leadership, Dad. It's having everyone working together toward the same goals instead of just reacting to whatever came up each day." Maybe so, but you're the one who created that environment. You're the one who had the vision to see what this place could become. That evening, after we'd closed and cleaned up, I drove to the cemetery where Grandma Rose was buried. It had become a monthly ritual for me, a way of checking in and sharing updates about the business and the family. The December air was cold enough that I could see my breath as I knelt beside her headstone and brushed away the few leaves that had accumulated since my last visit. "Well, Grandma, we made it through the legal challenge. Natalie decided it wasn't worth the fight, and Dad's finally found his place in the business. I think you'd be proud of how things have worked out." I paused, looking at the dates carved into the granite. She'd lived for 87 years, built a business from nothing, raised a family, and still had the foresight to protect what she'd created for future generations. "I've been thinking about what you wrote in your last letter, about how the business is my responsibility now, not just my inheritance. I'm starting to understand what that means, not just keeping the doors open and the bills paid, but being a steward of something that matters to the community." The cemetery was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic on the main road. I sat back on my heels and looked out over the town lights beginning to twinkle in the early darkness. "I want you to know that I'm not just preserving what you built, I'm growing it, making it stronger, preparing it for whatever challenges come next. This business is going to outlive all of us, and when it's my turn to pass it on, I want to make sure I do it as thoughtfully as you did." As I drove home that night, I thought about the year that was ending and the future that was beginning. 12 months ago, I'd been an employee worried about job security and wondering if I'd ever have the chance to fully implement my vision for the bakery. Now I was the owner of a thriving business, a respected member of the business community, and someone who'd successfully navigated a complex family and legal situation. But more than that, I'd learned something important about the difference between inheriting something and earning it. Grandma's trust had given me the legal right to own the bakery, but the past year had given me the experience and confidence to deserve that ownership. The challenges weren't over, running a business never gets easy, and family relationships require constant attention and care. But I felt ready for whatever came next, equipped with the legal protections Grandma had provided, the practical experience I'd gained, and the community support I'd earned through months of proving that I was worthy of the trust people had placed in me. January brought an unexpected visitor to Cedar Falls in the form of Harrison Manning, Derek's older brother and the founding partner of Manning Development Group. Unlike Derek's polished corporate approach, Harrison carried himself with the weathered confidence of someone who'd spent decades turning small towns into profitable development opportunities. He arrived on a Tuesday morning during the post-holiday lull, when the bakery was quiet enough for conversation, but busy enough to demonstrate our steady customer base. I was reviewing supplier invoices at the front counter when he walked in, his expensive boots clicking against our hardwood floors with purposeful authority. "Miss Brooks, His handshake was firm without being aggressive, and his smile carried the kind of practiced warmth that successful business people deploy when they need something. "I'm Harrison Manning. I believe you've met my brother Derek." "Mr. Manning, what brings you to Cedar Falls?" Direct and to the point. I appreciate that in a business owner. He gestured toward one of our corner tables. "Mind if we sit down? I'd like to discuss some opportunities that might interest you." I glanced toward the kitchen where Dad was prepping lunch orders, caught his eye and nodded toward Harrison. Dad's expression shifted to alert concern, but he gave me a subtle thumbs up that meant he'd be listening if I needed backup. "What kind of opportunity?" I asked as we settled into chairs that suddenly felt too small for the conversation we were about to have. Harrison pulled out his phone and showed me a series of photographs, storefronts, restaurant interiors, busy dining rooms full of well-dressed customers. "These are some of our recent projects in similar markets. Bend, Oregon, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Small towns with growing populations and increasing disposable income." The images were impressive, sleek, modern spaces that managed to feel both upscale and welcoming. But they all looked remarkably similar, as if they'd been designed by the same team working from the same playbook. "What you're looking at," Harrison continued, "is our artisan local concept. We partner with established local businesses to create elevated dining experiences that honor regional traditions while appealing to contemporary tastes." Partnership? Think of it as a franchise model, but with much more creative control for the local operator. You'd maintain ownership of your recipes, your brand identity, your staff relationships. We provide capital investment, marketing support, operational consulting, and access to our supply chain network. Harrison swiped to another series of photos showing bakery cases filled with pastries that looked professional but somehow generic. Our bakery partners typically see revenue increases of 60 to 80% within the first year, with profit margins that are significantly higher than traditional independent operations. "And what do you get out of this partnership?" "A percentage of gross revenue, plus licensing fees for the use of our operational systems and marketing platform. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement that lets local business owners focus on what they do best while we handle the parts of business development that most independent operators struggle with." The presentation was smooth and professional, clearly refined through dozens of similar conversations with small business owners who were probably flattered to be courted by a successful development company. But something about Harrison's approach felt different from Derek's obvious acquisition attempt. "Mr. Manning, I'm curious why you're interested in partnering with us specifically. Cedar Falls isn't exactly a major market." Harrison leaned back in his chair and smiled with what seemed like genuine appreciation. "That's exactly why you're interesting to us. You've built something authentic in a market that's poised for growth. The Portland suburbs are expanding, young professionals are looking for communities with character, and food tourism is becoming a significant economic driver in the Pacific Northwest." He gestured around the bakery with obvious approval. "What you've created here has the kind of local credibility that we can't manufacture. Our marketing research shows that consumers, especially in your demographic, are increasingly skeptical of businesses that feel corporate or artificial. So you want to use our authenticity to make your concept more appealing. I want to help you scale your authenticity to reach a much larger market while maintaining everything that makes it special." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Harrison presenting financial projections, operational frameworks, and success stories from other partners. His offer was sophisticated and generous, significantly more money than Derek's acquisition proposal, with the apparent benefit of letting me maintain control over the business I'd built. But as he talked, I found myself thinking about the photographs he'd shown me. The bakery cases looked professional, but they lacked the personality that came from Maria's traditional Mexican pastries or Tommy's experimental sourdough variation. The dining rooms were beautiful, but they felt designed for Instagram posts, rather than the kind of lingering conversations that happened naturally in our space. Mr. Manning, can I ask you something about your other bakery partnerships? Of course. Do they still offer items that are specific to their local communities, or do they primarily feature standardized products that work across all your locations? Harrison's pause was brief but telling. We found that certain operational efficiencies come from having some consistency across locations. Customers appreciate knowing they can get the same high-quality experience whether they're in Bend or Coeur d'Alene. What about the local recipes and traditions that made those businesses authentic in the first place? We work very carefully to preserve the elements that define each location's unique character. His answer was diplomatic but evasive, and I suspected that preserving unique character meant maintaining enough local flavor to support the marketing narrative while standardizing the operations that actually drove profitability. After Harrison left with promises to send detailed partnership proposals and financial projections, I spent the rest of the day thinking about what he'd offered and what it would mean for the bakery's future. The financial benefits were undeniable. Revenue increases of 60 to 80% would transform not just my business but my entire life. I could pay off my student loans, renovate the house on Maple Street, maybe even take a real vacation for the first time in years. More importantly, the partnership would provide resources that I couldn't access as an independent operator. Professional marketing support, supply chain efficiencies, operational consulting that could help me avoid the mistakes that often sink small businesses during periods of rapid growth. But I kept thinking about Mrs. Patterson's whole wheat toast, which we made from a recipe Grandma Rose had developed specifically for customers who needed reliable, simple nutrition. About Maria's tres leches cake, which brought in customers from the Latino community who appreciated having their traditions honored in a mainstream bakery. About the communion bread that connected us to the Methodist Church, and the birthday cakes that had become part of local families' celebrations. These weren't just products, they were relationships, connections that had developed organically over decades of serving the same community. Could those relationships survive the kind of scaling and systematization that Harrison's partnership model required? That evening, I called Elena Rodriguez, the restaurant owner in California who'd given me such helpful advice during the legal challenge. Her response to Harrison's proposal was immediate and decisive. "Run," she said without hesitation. "Run as fast as you can in the opposite direction. Elena, this isn't the same as Derek's acquisition offer. Harrison's talking about partnership, not buyout. Cassidy, I've seen this model before. They come in promising partnership and local control, but the financial pressures and operational requirements gradually force you to conform to their system. Within 2 years, you'll be running their concept with your name on it. But the revenue projections are probably accurate. You'll make more money, at least initially, but you'll also lose control over everything that makes your business special. And once you're dependent on their capital and their systems, you won't be able to go back to operating independently." Elena's warnings echoed in my mind as I reviewed the materials Harrison had left behind. The partnership agreement was 37 pages of legal language that granted Manning Development significant influence over everything from menu development to supplier relationships to staffing decisions. Buried in the operational requirements was language requiring consistency with brand standards across all partnership locations and adherence to approved product specifications and preparation methods. The creative control Harrison had promised was hedged with so many restrictions and approval processes that it seemed largely illusory. I spent the next week researching Manning Development's other partnerships, tracking down former business owners who'd entered similar arrangements. The pattern that emerged was troubling: initial success and revenue growth, followed by gradual standardization and loss of local character, often culminating in the original owners selling their partnership stakes and leaving the business entirely. One conversation was particularly illuminating. Janet Morrison had owned a successful bakery in Bend before partnering with Manning Development 3 years earlier. She'd sold her partnership stake back to the company 6 months ago, and now worked as a manager in someone else's restaurant. "The first year was great," Janet told me during a long phone conversation. "Revenue doubled, we got all this professional marketing support, everything looked like it was exactly what they'd promised. What changed? The requirements started getting more specific and more restrictive. First it was just suggestions about which products performed best in their other locations.
Then it became strongly recommended menu items that we needed to feature prominently. Eventually, they had veto power over anything we wanted to add or change. Janet's voice carried a weariness that made me think she'd told this story many times, trying to make sense of how she'd lost control of something she'd built from nothing. The breaking point came when they wanted me to discontinue the hazelnut coffee cake that my grandmother's recipe was famous for. It didn't photograph well for social media, and it required hand shaping that didn't fit their efficiency standard. When I refused, they threatened to terminate the partnership for violation of operational agreements. So you sold out. I took the buyout option rather than fight a legal battle I couldn't afford. Manning Development owns the location now, and they kept the bakery name but changed everything else. It's successful, profitable, and completely generic. Janet's story was a cautionary tale, but it also revealed something important about Harrison's strategy. His approach was more sophisticated than Derek's direct acquisition attempt, but the end goal was the same: control over valuable properties and successful local businesses. The difference was that Harrison's method was gradual, using financial incentives and operational dependencies to slowly transfer control rather than demanding it upfront. It was probably more effective because it appealed to business owners' desire to maintain their identities while solving their growth and capital challenges, but the result was the same. Local businesses became standardized components in a larger corporate system, losing the authenticity and community connections that had made them valuable in the first place. Armed with this research, I felt confident about declining Harrison's partnership offer. But I also realized that the Manning brothers' interest in Cedar Falls wasn't going to disappear just because I'd refused their proposal. They'd identified our downtown district as a growth opportunity, and they had the resources and patience to pursue multiple strategies until they found one that worked. The confirmation of this suspicion came 2 weeks later, when I noticed surveying equipment set up in the vacant lot behind the bakery. The lot had been empty for as long as I could remember, too small for major development, too oddly shaped for easy construction, just a patch of weeds and cracked asphalt that served as overflow parking during busy periods. I made some casual inquiries and learned that Manning Development had purchased the lot through a subsidiary company. They'd applied for permits to build a mixed-use commercial structure that would include restaurant space, retail shops, and professional office. The proposed building wouldn't directly compete with the bakery, but it would transform the character of our immediate neighborhood. More significantly, it would give Manning Development a permanent foothold in Cedar Falls' downtown district, positioning them to influence future development and potentially pressure surrounding businesses to sell or partner as the area changed around them. I realized I was looking at a long-term strategy that was much more sophisticated than either Derek's acquisition attempt or Harrison's partnership proposal. If they couldn't buy or partner with the businesses they wanted, they'd simply change the economic landscape around those businesses until cooperation became the most attractive option. The recognition of this strategy prompted me to reach out to other downtown business owners to discuss what Manning Development's arrival might mean for all of us. The conversation that emerged was eye-opening. Jake Morrison from the coffee roasting company had also been approached by Harrison about a potential partnership. The antique shop owner had received an unsolicited offer to purchase her building. The bookstore at the end of the block was struggling with rising rent as property values increased, and the owner was considering selling to a buyer who'd made an aggressive cash offer. "It's like they're playing chess while we're playing checkers," observed Susan Chen, who owned the flower shop across the street. "They're thinking several moves ahead, positioning themselves to control the entire downtown district by acquiring key properties and partnerships." "What can we do about it?" asked Tom Rivera from the hardware store. "We can organize," I suggested. "Form a business association, coordinate our responses, make sure we're not making decisions in isolation that play into their larger strategy." The idea resonated with the group, and within a month we'd formed the Cedar Falls Downtown Business Alliance. Our initial membership included 12 independently owned businesses, representing everything from retail shops to professional services to restaurants. Our first collective action was to hire a local attorney to review Manning Development's permit applications and ensure they complied with all zoning requirements and environmental regulations. We discovered that their proposed building violated several setback requirements and would create parking shortages that would affect surrounding businesses. More importantly, we learned that their permit applications had been submitted with incomplete environmental impact assessment. The vacant lot they'd purchased had been the site of a gas station in the 1960s. And there were questions about soil contamination that hadn't been adequately addressed. Our attorney filed formal objections to the permits, requiring Manning Development to conduct additional studies and address the concerns we'd raised. The process wouldn't stop their development permanently, but it would delay their timeline and increase their costs significantly. The permit challenge also gave us time to develop a broader strategy for protecting the character and independence of Cedar Falls downtown district. We worked with the City Council to update zoning ordinances that would limit the size and scope of chain businesses, require design standards that preserved historical character, and prioritize locally owned businesses in future development decisions. These efforts attracted attention from regional media outlets, who framed our story as a David and Goliath battle between local businesses and corporate development. The coverage brought support from customers and community members, who hadn't realized that their favorite downtown district was under pressure from outside developers. The increased visibility also attracted the attention of other communities that had faced similar challenges. Business owners from towns throughout the Pacific Northwest reached out to share their experiences and offer advice on strategies that had worked or failed in their situation. One particularly helpful connection came from Astoria, Oregon, where a similar business alliance had successfully fought off a major chain retailer that wanted to build a store that would have destroyed much of their historic downtown district. Their strategy had combined legal challenges, community organizing, and alternative development proposals that achieved growth while preserving local character. The key, explained Maria Santos, who led Astoria's business alliance, is to offer viable alternatives rather than just opposing everything. Developers have capital and expertise that communities need, but they also need permission and cooperation from local stakeholders. If you can channel that energy toward projects that serve community interests, everyone benefits. Maria's advice led us to develop our own alternative development proposal for the vacant lot behind the bakery. Instead of Manning Development's mixed-use building, we proposed a community market pavilion that would provide space for local farmers, artisans, and food vendors, while preserving the area's walkable human-scale character. Our proposal addressed the same economic development goals that had attracted Manning Development to Cedar Falls, but in a way that supported existing businesses rather than competing with them.
The market pavilion would draw visitors to the downtown district, increase foot traffic for all businesses, and create opportunities for local entrepreneurs who couldn't afford traditional retail space. Working with local architects and planners, we developed detailed designs and financial projections that demonstrated the viability of our alternative approach. The project would cost less than Manning Development's proposal, generate comparable tax revenue for the city, and create more local jobs while preserving the authentic character that made Cedar Falls attractive to residents and visitors. The community response to our alternative proposal was overwhelmingly positive. The City Council voted to designate the vacant lot as a priority site for community-oriented development, effectively blocking Manning Development's original plans while opening the door for our market pavilion concept. But Manning Development's response was swift and aggressive. Harrison Manning requested a private meeting with me, ostensibly to discuss potential collaboration on the market pavilion project. We met at a restaurant in the next town over, neutral territory that allowed for frank conversation without the political implications of being seen together in Cedar Falls. Harrison's demeanor was different from his earlier visit. Still professional but with an undercurrent of frustration that suggested his patience with small-town resistance was wearing thin. Miss Brooks, I have to admit I'm impressed by the sophistication of your business alliance's response to our development plans. You've managed to turn a simple commercial real estate transaction into a community organizing campaign. Thank you. We're proud of what we've accomplished working together. I'm sure you are. But I think you may be overestimating your ability to control the economic forces that are reshaping communities like Cedar Falls. Growth is going to happen whether you manage it proactively or fight it defensively. Harrison's tone carried a subtle threat that made me understand this conversation was about more than just the vacant lot behind the bakery. We're not fighting growth, Mr. Manning. We're advocating for growth that serves our community's interests rather than just generating profits for outside investors. And what happens when your community's interests conflict with economic reality? What happens when your idealistic market pavilion can't generate enough revenue to justify the land value? Or when your business alliance members start struggling financially and need the capital that partnership with established developers can provide? We'll adapt and find solutions that work for everyone. Harrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Miss Brooks, I want you to understand something. My company has invested significant time and resources in the Cedar Falls market. We've identified opportunities that align with regional growth trends and demographic projections that go beyond what local business owners can see from their current perspective. He leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on the kind of intensity that suggested he wasn't used to having his plans challenged by small-town business owners. "We're going to succeed in this market, one way or another. The question is whether local businesses like yours will be partners in that success or obstacles to be overcome. I'd prefer partnership, but I'm prepared for either scenario." The meeting ended cordially, but Harrison's message was clear. Manning Development viewed Cedar Falls as a territory to be conquered rather than a community to be served. Our business alliance had won a tactical victory with the permit challenge and alternative development proposal, but we were now engaged in a larger conflict that would require sustained effort and resources we weren't sure we could maintain. Driving home from that meeting, I realized that owning a successful business in a small town carried responsibilities I'd never anticipated. It wasn't enough to serve customers well and manage operations efficiently. I'd become a community leader by necessity, someone who had to think strategically about economic development, political dynamics, and social change. The weight of that responsibility was both intimidating and energizing. Intimidating because the decisions I made would affect not just my own business, but the livelihoods of other business owners and the character of the community that had supported my success. Energizing because I finally understood the full scope of what Grandma Rose had meant when she'd written about stewardship versus ownership. Owning the bakery wasn't just about running a profitable business, it was about being a guardian of something larger than myself. Something that connected past and future in ways that purely financial considerations couldn't capture. That evening, I called an emergency meeting of the Downtown Business Alliance to share what I'd learned from my conversation with Harrison. The response was immediate and decisive. We weren't going to be intimidated into abandoning the community-oriented development path we'd chosen, but we also recognized that we needed to move beyond defensive strategies and take proactive steps to strengthen our position. Over the next month, we developed a comprehensive plan that included fundraising for the Market Pavilion project, lobbying for additional zoning protections, and building coalitions with other communities facing similar challenges. Most importantly, we committed to supporting each other's businesses through coordinated marketing, shared resources, and collaborative events that would demonstrate the vitality and sustainability of locally owned enterprises. The holiday season had shown me what the bakery could accomplish with proper planning and community support. Now it was time to show Manning Development what a organized community could accomplish when its values and future were at stake. Spring arrived in Cedar Falls with the kind of gentle warmth that made everything feel possible again. The Market Pavilion project had gained momentum through the winter months, with local contractors volunteering their time, community members contributing materials, and neighboring towns offering advice based on their own successful project. What had started as a defensive response to Manning Development's plans had evolved into something much more significant, a demonstration of what communities could accomplish when they worked together toward shared goals. The groundbreaking ceremony took place on a Saturday morning in April, with half the town gathered around the vacant lot that had once represented Manning Development's foothold in our downtown district. Mayor Richardson spoke about the importance of community-driven development, and several business owners shared stories about how the collaborative planning process had strengthened relationships and created new opportunities for cooperation. When it came time for me to speak, I found myself looking out at faces that had become familiar over the months of organizing and planning. Mrs. Patterson was there with her husband Harold, both of them beaming with pride at what their community had accomplished. Maria and Tommy stood with the other bakery staff wearing matching t-shirts that Sarah had designed with our new Alliance logo. Dad was near the front, his camera ready to document the moment when we turned the first shovel of earth. 6 months ago, I began, this lot represented someone else's vision for our community's future. Today it represents our own vision, one that honors our past while embracing the possibilities that come from working together. The applause was warm but brief. Everyone was eager to get to the actual groundbreaking, to move from planning to building, from vision to reality. As we worked that morning, laying the foundation stones that local quarries had donated and installing the timber frame that volunteer carpenters had prepared, I felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond the success of any single project. We were creating something that would serve the community for decades, something that demonstrated the value of locally controlled development and community-oriented business practices. But the real test came 2 weeks later when Harrison Manning returned to Cedar Falls with a new proposal that caught everyone off guard. Instead of continuing to fight our Market Pavilion project, or pursuing additional property acquisitions, Manning Development announced plans to invest in existing local businesses through what they called a community partnership fund. They would provide low-interest loans, operational consulting and marketing support to help established businesses expand and modernize, while maintaining local ownership and community character. The proposal was brilliant in its strategic sophistication. Rather than positioning themselves as outside developers trying to impose corporate concepts on a resistant community, they were offering to support the very businesses that had organized against their earlier plan. Harrison presented the Community Partnership Fund at a well-attended town hall meeting, flanked by financial advisors and community development experts, who spoke eloquently about the benefits of public-private partnerships and sustainable economic growth. "We've listened to the concerns that have been raised about outside development," Harrison said, his tone respectful and collaborative, "and we've realized that our initial approach didn't adequately consider the unique assets and values that make Cedar Falls special." The presentation included case studies from other small towns where Manning Development had successfully implemented similar partnership programs. Business owners who'd received fund support spoke via video about increased revenues, improved facilities, and expanded customer bases, all while maintaining their independence and local identity. "This isn't about changing what works," Harrison continued. "It's about providing resources that help local businesses reach their full potential, while preserving everything that makes this community authentic and sustainable." The audience response was mixed but generally positive. Several business owners asked detailed questions about loan terms, application processes, and the level of oversight that would come with fund participation. Harrison's answers were transparent and reasonable, addressing concerns about corporate control while emphasizing the voluntary nature of the program. After the meeting, I found myself surrounded by Alliance members, seeking my opinion on this unexpected development. The consensus seemed to be cautious optimism. Manning Development's new approach addressed many of the concerns we'd raised about their earlier proposals, while offering resources that could genuinely benefit local businesses. "What do you think, Cassidy?" asked Susan Chen from the flower shop. "This sounds completely different from what they were proposing before." "It is different," I agreed. "The question is whether it's actually better, or just more sophisticated." Over the next few days, I spent considerable time researching Manning Development's Community Partnership Fund, tracking down business owners in other towns who'd participated in similar programs. The results were more complex than either complete success or obvious failure. Most participants had indeed seen revenue increases and operational improvements. The loans were offered at competitive rates, the consulting services were professional and helpful, and the marketing support had genuine value. Manning Development seemed to have learned from their earlier, more heavy-handed approaches and developed a model that provided benefits while respecting local autonomy. But there were subtle patterns that concerned me. Over time, businesses that participated in the fund tended to become similar to each other in ways that suggested influence beyond simple consulting. Menu items, operational procedures, marketing approaches, even aesthetic choices, seemed to converge toward recognizable standards that reflected Manning Development's preferences, rather than purely local decision-making. The changes were gradual and probably not intentional on the part of individual business owners, but they represented the kind of cultural homogenization that our alliance had been trying to prevent. It was as if Manning Development had found a way to achieve their original goals through financial incentives and professional relationships rather than direct ownership or control. I shared these observations with the alliance leadership, and we decided to invite Harrison to a private meeting where we could ask more pointed questions about the fund's structure and long-term implications. The meeting took place at the bakery on a quiet Tuesday evening, with core alliance members gathered around tables we'd pushed together to create a conference setting. Harrison arrived alone, a gesture that suggested confidence in his proposal and respect for our collaborative approach. "Thank you for this opportunity to discuss the partnership fund in more detail," he began. "I want to address any concerns you might have and make sure everyone understands exactly what we're offering." Tom Rivera from the hardware store was the first to speak up. "Harrison, we've been researching your similar programs in other communities, and we've noticed that businesses tend to become more alike after participating in the fund. Can you explain how that happens?" Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "That's a perceptive observation. What you're seeing is the result of businesses learning from each other and adopting best practices that have proven successful in similar markets. But who determines what constitutes best practices? And how do you ensure that local traditions and community-specific approaches aren't lost in the process of standardization?" The fund provides access to data and expertise that individual business owners might not otherwise have. We share information about what works in comparable markets, suggest operational improvements that can increase efficiency and profitability, and help businesses avoid common mistakes that can be costly. Harrison paused and looked around the table at each of us. "But participation is entirely voluntary, and businesses maintain complete control over their operations and decision-making. We're advisors, not managers." Susan Chen leaned forward.
What happens if a business wants to discontinue their relationship with the fund? Are there penalties or restrictions? Loans would need to be repaid according to their terms, but there are no penalties for early termination of consulting or marketing services. We want our partners to be successful and satisfied, not trapped in arrangements that don't serve their interest. The questions continued for nearly 2 hours, covering everything from loan default procedures to intellectual property rights to long-term expansion expectations. Harrison's answers were consistently reasonable and transparent, addressing our concerns without seeming defensive or evasive. By the end of the meeting, most Alliance members seemed genuinely interested in learning more about the fund's offerings. The financial benefits were significant, the operational support appeared valuable, and the restrictions seemed minimal compared to the resources being offered. But I found myself thinking about Janet Morrison's experience with Manning Development's partnership program, and how the initial benefits had gradually given way to increased control and eventual loss of independence. Harrison's community fund seemed different, more respectful of local autonomy, but the underlying economic dynamics were similar. After everyone else had left, Dad and I cleaned up the meeting space and talked about what we'd heard. What's your gut feeling about this? My gut feeling is that Harrison is sincere about wanting to support local businesses, but that Manning Development's institutional interests will eventually override good intentions. You think they're trying to control us through debt and dependency instead of outright acquisition? I think they're trying to achieve the same results through more sophisticated means. If they can't buy the businesses they want, they'll finance them. If they can't control operations directly, they'll shape them through consulting and best practice. The end result might be the same: a downtown district that looks local but operates according to corporate standards. Dad was quiet for a moment, wiping down tables that were already clean. So what do? We prove that local businesses can succeed without outside financing or management. We demonstrate that community-oriented development can be both authentic and profitable. And if other Alliance members decide to participate in Manning's fund anyway, then we respect their decisions and continue building our own model. We can't control what other people choose, but we can control what example we set. Over the next month, several Alliance members did apply for fund participation. The hardware store received a loan to expand their tool rental program. The flower shop got funding for a greenhouse addition that would allow year-round local growing. The bookstore used fund resources to create a cafe space that complemented rather than competed with the bakery. Each of these expansions was genuinely beneficial for the businesses involved and for the community as a whole. Property values increased, foot traffic grew, and the downtown district became more vibrant and attractive to residents and visitors. But I noticed subtle changes in how fund participants operated. Planning meetings became more focused on financial metrics and less on community. Marketing materials started featuring professional photography and standardized messaging that looked polished but felt less personal. Operational decisions increasingly referenced industry standards and best practices rather than local preferences and traditional approach. The changes weren't dramatic or obviously problematic, but they represented a shift toward professionalization that made our downtown district feel more like other successful small-town commercial areas and less like the unique community gathering place it had always been. Meanwhile, the bakery continued to thrive without fund participation. Our revenue had grown steadily throughout the year, driven by community loyalty, word-of-mouth recommendations, and the kind of authentic relationships that couldn't be replicated through professional marketing strategy. More importantly, we'd become a hub for community organizing and collaboration. The successful Market Pavilion project had led to other joint initiatives: a shared composting program that reduced waste costs for all downtown businesses, a coordinated marketing campaign that promoted the entire district rather than individual stores, and monthly community dinners that brought together residents, business owners, and civic leaders to discuss local issues and opportunities. These activities didn't generate direct revenue for the bakery, but they created the kind of social capital that made our business indispensable to the community's identity and well-being. We weren't just selling pastries and coffee, we were facilitating relationships and supporting civic engagement. The contrast between our approach and the fund participants' increasing professionalization became apparent during the annual Founders' Day celebration in September. Businesses that had historically decorated their storefronts with homemade banners and local artwork now featured professionally designed displays that looked impressive but somehow generic. The bakery's contribution to the celebration was characteristically different. Instead of a polished marketing display, we set up an outdoor kitchen, where community members could learn traditional baking techniques and share stories about family recipes and food traditions. Maria taught children how to shape conchas, the Mexican sweetbread that had become one of our most popular weekend items. Tommy demonstrated sourdough starter maintenance and talked about the science of fermentation. Dad regaled visitors with stories about the bakery's history and the role it had played in community celebrations over the decades. Our booth was messier and less photogenic than the professional displays around us, but it attracted bigger crowds and generated more genuine engagement. People stayed longer, asked more questions, and left with deeper connections to both our business and the broader community. The success of our Founders' Day participation led to invitations from other communities that were grappling with similar development pressure. Towns throughout the Pacific Northwest wanted to learn about our alliance model, our alternative development strategies, and our approach to community-oriented business practice. These speaking engagements and consulting opportunities represented a new revenue stream that I hadn't anticipated, but they also reinforced my understanding of the broader significance of what we'd accomplished in Cedar Falls. We demonstrated that small communities could shape their own economic development, rather than simply accepting whatever outside investors chose to offer. More importantly, we'd shown that businesses could be profitable while prioritizing community values over purely financial consideration. The bakery's success wasn't just measured in revenue growth or profit margins, but in the strength of relationships we'd built and the positive impact we'd had on community life. By the end of the year, it was clear that Manning Development's community fund had achieved its intended result. Participating businesses were more successful financially, the downtown district was more attractive and vibrant, and property values had increased significantly throughout the area. But it was also clear that something essential had been lost in the process. The spontaneous, quirky, authentically local character that had made Cedar Falls special was being replaced by a more polished, professional, marketable version of small-town charm. The change wasn't necessarily bad. Many residents appreciated the improved services and increased economic opportunity. But it represented a fundamental shift in priorities, from community relationships to customer experiences, from local traditions to industry standards, from authentic messiness to manufacturer authenticity. Harrison Manning's final visit came in December, ostensibly to check on fund participants and assess the program's success. But his real purpose became clear when he requested a private meeting with me to discuss the bakery's role in Cedar Falls' continued development. We met at the same restaurant, where we'd had our earlier confrontational conversation, but the atmosphere was completely different. Harrison seemed relaxed and satisfied, like someone who'd successfully completed a challenging project. Cassidy, I want to thank you for the role you've played in making our community fund such a success. Your alliance provided exactly the kind of local leadership and community credibility that made businesses comfortable participating in our program. I'm not sure we see the program's success the same way. Harrison smiled. I think we see it more similarly than you might expect. You wanted to preserve Cedar Falls' authentic community character while supporting local business success. We wanted to invest in a market with strong fundamentals and community support. Both goals have been achieved. Have they? Look around. Downtown Cedar Falls is thriving. Property values are up, businesses are profitable, residents have access to better services and amenities. The community has successfully managed growth while maintaining its essential identity. Harrison was right, to a point. Cedar Falls was undeniably more prosperous and professionally managed than it had been a year earlier. But prosperity and professional management weren't the same things as community health and authentic local character. What's next for Manning Development in Cedar Falls? I asked. We're exploring opportunities in other nearby communities that could benefit from similar partnership programs. Cedar Falls has become a model for how outside investment can support rather than threaten local business communities. And the bakery? The bakery remains the heart of Cedar Falls' downtown district, just as it should be. You've proven that businesses can succeed by staying true to their community roots while being open to growth and change. After Harrison left, I sat in the restaurant parking lot for a long time, thinking about what he'd said and what it meant for the future. Manning Development had achieved their goals. They'd established a profitable presence in a growing market, increased property values throughout the area, and created a replicable model for community investment that other development companies would undoubtedly study and copy. But we'd achieved our goals too. The bakery remained independently owned and community-focused. The Market Pavilion had become a beloved gathering place that strengthened rather than commercialized downtown social life. The Business Alliance continued to provide mutual support and coordinate community-oriented activities. Most importantly, we demonstrated that there were alternatives to the simple choice between stagnation and corporate development. Communities could shape their own growth, businesses could succeed while prioritizing relationships over profits, and local ownership could coexist with professional management and modern marketing. That evening, I drove to Grandma Rose's grave for my monthly visit. The cemetery was quiet and peaceful in the December twilight, with just enough snow on the ground to make everything feel clean and fresh. Well, Grandma, we made it through our first year of ownership. Dad and I are working together better than ever, the business is more successful than it's ever been, and we've helped our community navigate some pretty significant changes. I brushed snow off her headstone and arranged the small bouquet of winter flowers I'd brought from our display cooler. I think you'd be proud of what we've built here, not just the bakery, but the whole network of relationships and community connections that have grown around it. We've proven that family businesses can be forces for positive change, not just sources of personal income. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the bare branches of the oak tree that shaded the gravesite. I pulled my coat tighter and continued my one-sided conversation. I've been thinking about what you wrote in your last letter, about stewardship versus ownership. I think I finally understand what you meant. Owning a business isn't just about having legal rights to make decisions, it's about accepting responsibility for something bigger than yourself. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls, past the market pavilion where a few vendors were closing their stalls for the day, past the bakery where tomorrow's bread dough was already rising in the walk-in cooler, past the other downtown businesses that had found their own ways to balance tradition and innovation, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction with what we'd accomplished. The challenges weren't over, they never would be. Communities are always evolving, businesses always face new pressures and opportunities, and the balance between preservation and progress requires constant attention and adjustment. But we'd proven that small businesses could be more than just economic units competing for market share. They could be community institutions that strengthen social connections, preserve cultural traditions, and demonstrate alternative approaches to development and growth. The bakery that Grandma Rose had built, that Dad had maintained, and that I had transformed was now something more than any of us had imagined when we were simply trying to make good pastries and serve loyal customers. It had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose cooperation over competition, community values over corporate efficiency, and authentic relationships over professional networking. Manning Development would continue expanding their model to other communities, offering the same sophisticated combination of financial incentives and professional support that had succeeded in Cedar Falls. Some communities would benefit from their approach, finding ways to achieve growth while maintaining their essential character. But other communities would choose different paths, inspired by examples like ours that demonstrated the viability of locally controlled development and community-oriented business practice. The future belonged to both models, and the communities that thrived would be those that consciously chose which approach aligned with their values and aspirations, rather than simply accepting whatever outside forces offered. As for the bakery, we would continue doing what we'd always done, serving good food, supporting community relationships, and proving that success could be measured in more than just financial terms. Some victories aren't about defeating your opponents, but about staying true to your principles while building something worth preserving for the next generation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.